thank you guys initially for coming along today. Thank you to Nick and the team also for the invite. So just a show of hands, who is a farmer here? Hands up high. So about half, an agronomist. Got a few, yep. Machinery rep, dealership, yep. I think that's really important. I know the farmers are the last ones to have the capital outlay, I guess, but from my sense, from a WeedSmart sense, it's really important that not only the agronomists and the farmers, but also the machinery dealers, all three of you have got important parts to play when it comes to weed management and weed control. Ultimately, it's the growers in the group here that are going to have that final decision to actually choose what they do, hopefully at the back of a header. But I'm here today just to give you a bit of a background on why we are looking at doing it and perhaps some of the tips on how best to do it. Another show of hands, so I like it being a bit of a informal chat. Who's heard of the WeedSmart Big Six? Everyone, hopefully? I'm not going to run through everything because, we're here to talk basically about that one at the end there, and that is harvest weed seed control, why we do it, and how we can do it. A no-brainer for you guys, the farmers in the group. Why are we looking at doing it? Because weeds, in terms of competition with your crops, cost millions and possibly billions of dollars across the nation. And once resistance starts creeping in, it costs you even more money when you move from something as simple and economic as a straight trifluralin to Sakura or an Overwatch or something a bit more premium. So the added cost of herbicide resistance is a big cost to you guys, the growers. I'm going to acknowledge Roberto Busey as well as Peter Boutsalis. Both of them run herbicide resistance testing. This one from Roberto, I guess part of my job, I'm the equivalent of NUMS across here, but I do South Australia and Victoria. So I can't just run the same presentation if I'm Eyre Peninsula to the Wimmera to up in the Riverland and the Mallee. Every area is different. So I've asked Roberto and Peter to give me some information on the Esperance and also WA area. So what you're seeing from Roberto here is some Esperance specific information. And I think the important thing here, when I look at these numbers down the right-hand side, I see you guys as not having much of a problem in terms of ryegrass resistance. There's no numbers there that are double figures. I'm sure Monica and co will have some individual paddocks that would defy that. But where I think we should be looking is in this left-hand column. And the difference between the two is they only ever specify something as resistant if more than 20% of the plants, so whether it be radish, ryegrass, brome, 20% or more actually survive the application. So I see this when Roberto sent it to me. If I was in your shoes, I'm thinking, yep, we're doing a pretty good job. But it's this tidal wave that's coming through that when that column moves into the more than 20% column, there's going to be some substantial numbers going through. And obviously a lot of the pre-Ms, and for South Australians, we rely on the pre-Ms because we've got nothing in terms of post-Ms that are actually going to work. So it's probably a bit of a heads up from my experience to you guys that these numbers here, we're experiencing them over here, okay? So I guess something I'd like to try to encourage you to think of is, learning from our experience with ryegrass resistance and seeing if you can stop what's happened to us here. And it's a very similar thing we're learning off of you with radish resistance and trying to stop that becoming a major problem for us as well. Peter Boutsalis here, it's 3 years, 19, 20, 21. And I like this because it also gets a bit of a feel what's happening interstate. So in SA, in Vic, in New South Wales, obviously we're looking down that column and it's the whole of WA. So that's why the numbers are quite different to what Roberto has given me. And I think when I have a look at it, you can see that, what would it be, 30 odd years ago, when you had to go away from trifluralin because the label said you had to incorporate it 3 or 4 times, your soil type was not indicative to that. It started to blow away. You went away from triflin for a while, whereas something like SA has been there all along. So we've developed it back in the late 90s and it's just progressed ever since. But some of these other numbers, particularly glyphosate resistance, another quick show of hands, who knows that they've actually got glypho-resistant ryegrass on their farm? Yep, nothing to be embarrassed about. It's out there, and it is the elephant in the room that we're trying to really stop, because it starts on fence lines, progresses out, and probably one thing with the size of the machinery, the bigger the machinery is getting, the further we're spreading it, and quicker we're spreading it further into the paddock. So when I look at harvest weed seed control, I take a little bit of a step back, and this is probably a bit more of an agronomy sense. And when I say that, you have to put yourself in the weed's shoes. So I've picked some pretty rubbery numbers here in terms of how much of a particular population of any weed comes up in 1 year. So you're going to get almost 3/4 of your ryegrass coming up out of the seed bank in an annual year. Radish, that can be a bit flexible. I've picked 40 there. Barley grass, 90%, brome, 80. And it depends on the season, of course. Like when you have a really good autumn and you have several significant rainfall events, you have a lot higher number come up. So I've grabbed these numbers here, and it really doesn't matter. Let's pick 100 seeds per square metre. So as you flow through, and I've chosen 3 years just to split up the difference here. After 3 years of 100% control of those seeds that germinate, we're down to about 3 for ryegrass. So we've almost got it done. And that might be oat and hay or a chemical fallow, something that you're just not letting anything go to seed. You can also pick up that something like barley grass, probably after 2 years. If you have 2 years of stopping barley grass, stop at seed sets, you've almost nailed it. Brome, somewhere in between rye and barley grass. Whereas radish, no surprise, I'm talking to, or in the state of radish, and you speak to the likes of Newms or Bill Campbell and some of those, and they're talking 6 to 8 years to basically get rid of radish if you can. So a consideration when you're looking at harvest weed seed control, and particularly like with mills and things like that, we want to get the crop as dry as possible, and like Tom alluded to, that can be a bit problematic being so coastal. Like you do have higher grain moistures, a lot more humidity, and I can put my hand up and say York Peninsula very much the same. We've got water on 2 if not 3 sides, and I've got clients on the Kangaroo Island, and obviously being an island they've got water all around, so getting the crop off is a major issue. But the key, regardless of whether you're looking at lining, decking, mills, chaff carts, it all gets back to how many seeds are actually coming in the front of the header. And we'll hear from Sam and Nick shortly, but I'm just trying to build that story as to what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. Germinations of weeds and also maturities are the other thing, because I look at the different grasses and also radish as how much of it is mature and ready to come in the header front also. So again, barley grass, an absolute pain in the bum because it's shed its seed, it's very, very early maturing. So if you were in a high barley grass area, harvest weed seed management's probably not going to be high on your list because you're simply just not getting enough seed in any 1 year. Brome, I've done a lot of testing with our local farmer group over home, and about 53% was all that we could ever get in. And chatting to, I can see Mick here from yesterday, completely agree how it's amazing how brome can dodge the header knife and just wave at you as the header's gone by, because we've commented on that for a long time. Sometimes it's a blunt or not sharp header knife, but a lot of times it's just the nature of the beast that just dodges the knife. And just some local data again. A lot of you may have heard of Catherine Borger from ARI. 3 years here, a few years ago now, but the point here, looking at ryegrass, brome and barley grass, is that every year is going to be different in terms of when the crop is ready, of course, to harvest, and how much of that weed seed is still there on the plant. So if I pick brome, for instance, in this particular year, 16, 64, so 2/3 of the brome grass had already shed by the time harvest was ready. 28 the following year, 46 the next. So that's a huge variation. And you can obviously see that between the different grass species that there's difference there. So it does get back to knowing what you're targeting and just taking on board that every season is going to be that little bit different. So what I put together for over home, and Monica asked a good question last week about developing maybe a local example of this. I just looked at 4 of the main components of some major weeds, and yeah, just gave them a rating out of 4, and it sort of gave me a harvest weed seed control rating. So the lower the number, the less that harvest weed seed control is probably going to be favourable for that weed. So no surprises, something like seed shedding for milk thistle. If you've ever seen the milk thistles on a windy day, you just can't get them in the header and they've already set seed. And a lot of people don't realise how quickly milk thistle or sow thistle set seed. Once you can see that white fluff on top, even though it's still in its pod, it's mature seed ready for next year. So again, you can see the variance, and something like the brassica species are a lot more suited to harvest weed seed control because of their maturity. They have a good height, and that's something that barley grass, for instance, quite a prostrate grower. They don't lodge, and something like mustard that we've got huge problems with doesn't actually shed seed as well. So it retains its seed. So we're targeting it regardless of harvest weed seed control. We're targeting it with some form because we know that whatever's left at the end of the year is going to come in the header. So I think I've repeated myself there, but all harvest weed seed practices rely on what's coming in the header. So that's a real key take-home message. There'll be a few take-home messages, but I have said to Alex and Mark and that I've actually made a PDF form of my presentation. So if I get cut short or something, I'm going to ask them to forward it out to you guys so that you can absorb the information a little bit more. Some of it may not be quite local, as in that last slide, but at least you'll have something you can take home. So the key is drying the crop down. We just heard briefly from Tom about a dry crop is hard to do in high humidity or coastal conditions, but something like a mill definitely works a lot better the drier you can get your crop down. So it's something that, when you look through this list, whether it be crop topping cereals or the use of diquat or glyphosate in canola, windrowing comes into it with barley. And the thing I like about windrowing is that it's collecting those weed seeds a lot earlier than the harvest process, and it's concentrating them as well. So when the header eventually goes in there, you're going to get more weed seeds, and they can be processed, by whatever means of harvest weed seed control you've got. So, and lentils, I know they're starting to get around Esperance, obviously a big thing for us over in SA, and we double knock our lentils, so that's a glyphosate followed by a paraquat within probably 2 to 5 days. So double knock normally pertains to your knockdown before the crop goes in, but it's gaining more momentum all year round. It might be double knock, it might be targeting fleabane flax during the summer. Like, there's lots of places now that we're looking for that, and that's to stop those weeds from becoming glyphosate resistant, but for better control as well. So a couple of examples here. On the left here, we've got straight paraquat, and you can see a lot of prickly lettuce, whip thistle. I think it's east, they call it whip thistle, but prickly lettuce and milk thistle. And here we double knocked, and you can just see the difference from weed control. And my client was able to get into that paddock several days prior because it was a lot drier. The glypho started the process, the paraquat finished it off, and he was in there and going. In this instance here, different client, different area, just a one pass. So he actually mixed a bit of sharpening with glypho on that one. And again, you can see he's had a lot better brown outs and dry down on problem mustard and thistle through there. So when we're looking at and lentils, and it's also when you have a wet spring and stuff in your cereals, you just want to be able to dry that crop down as much as possible. So glyphosates in that sense can be very, very handy to set up your crop for harvest weed seed control. Some more really good information here from Mike Walsh. I refer to a lot of these things as 1%ers, and this would be your classic slide of 1%. And the reason being that work by Ari has shown there's a little bit of variance between your 4 major grass species, ryegrass, radish is in there as well, brome and wild oats. But the take-home message is, as an average, every day that you're not necessarily late, but you're delayed in getting into a certain paddock, there's going to be an extra 1% of your weed seeds that have shed. So if for some reason you might be 10 days late, could be a machinery breakdown, it could be the weather, there's 10% more seed that's in the seed bank for next year. So it's not a big consideration, because the main thing for the growers again is to get that grain out the paddock as soon as possible. But if you've got 5 paddocks of a wheat, 5 paddocks of barley, canola, whatever the crop is, maybe just put that little 5 seconds into thinking, oh yeah, that one's the dirty one, I want to go to that one first. Could start setting that paddock up. Might only be a few percent, but every percent is what we're chasing here. So I've tailored this one to the Seed Terminator crew, but it's a list of take-home messages, I guess. How do we make the harvest mill or the Seed Terminator more efficient? I mentioned every 1%er, so the lower that you can make the amount of weeds that it's having to deal with for a start, the better off like you're going to be. And that could be resistance testing and knowing what is working, mixing and rotating your herbicides, efficient and accurate spray application, that's coming more and more to the fore. So I always look at trying to optimise what is in your tank and getting that to the soil if it's a pre-emergent, or to the weed if it's a post-emergent. So the lower number of the weeds, the less that the harvest mill has to deal with. Everyone has a reference generally to a Coke can height. We're at a brewery, so we'll say beer can height in this sense. The more you can keep those weed seed heads in your harvesting sort of range, the more is going to come in the header. Quite an obvious one. And that might be decreasing, or there's a reference to like spreading some seed out in front and having no row spacing, so you're having competition between the rows as well. But the narrower that your row spacing is, the more those weeds are generally got to go up reaching for the sky, and that means they're going to be cut off and dealt with in whatever way, shape or mean through your header. We've just mentioned the dirtiest paddocks first. Dry down your crops as much as possible. And the key one, and this is coming from an agronomist perspective, not necessarily WeedSmart, I always encourage my guys with mills to drive to the mill. There's a lot of perception, I guess, out there of, I've got a mill on the back, it's going to do the job on the weeds, I'll just drive the header, as I normally have. You have to drive it to the mill, and that's the key thing, because if you've spent the money on a mill, you want to make sure that it works the best that it possibly can. and that means that you keep that little arrow or such like in between the revs that is optimal for your header. And look, I know PSD or positive straw discharge is I think it's a New Holland thing, but there are other brands out there as well that just sort of keep your straw and your chaff separate and help prevent blockages as well. So thank you. I'm going to be around all afternoon. There's plenty to talk about. You can see I'm passionate about weed control and weed management, so feel free to come up and have a beer with me. And if I can get my study tour up and happening later in the year, yeah, love to bring some York Peninsula growers and show them how it's done. Thank you.